Hey, what's up, 12th graders, seniors? I'll be giving you guys a final project. If not Wednesday, then I might post it on Thursday or Friday, so just be aware of that. We're close to the end. You guys are close to the end. I mean, I know it's not as exciting considering that you guys are like, didn't really have the last part of senior year, which is usually the funnest part. But, at least think about we're safe, and that's what's most important. Yeah, so just think about that, okay? So I know it's not the funnest, but like I said, at least we're safe. That's the most important thing. You always get to party. You guys are young. You guys will get to party, and you know, well, I mean, you guys will get to party. You guys are, like I said, pretty young. So don't take it too harshly. I guess just at least we're safe. You know, you can party if you're dead, right? So just keep that in mind. Okay. So yeah. So anyways, I was a pineapple today because look at the background. Well, I like pineapples too, but look at the background. It's really cool. It's the beach. You can't go to the beaches because, LA County, all of California, they close the beaches except for Ventura, which is like Santa Barbara and those, but that's too far. I'm not going to drive all the way over there just for the beach. That's too far for me. So it is what it is. It's like 2, 3 hours just to find the beach. Nah. But some people would. I wouldn't, but some people would. But I do like the beach. Check it out. It's really nice. Anyways, you know what bugged me? Like I like how this filter. Look at that. It's really cool. I also like that it's pineapple. I don't like that it doesn't have any eyes. Oh, obviously it has mine, but like it should have eyes. Like pineapples, you have the little eyes. This one doesn't, and that annoys me. Like they should have paid attention to detail. Don't you guys think? Anyways, so like I said, I'll give you guys a final project. We're gonna continue with this story, which is really interesting. Written in 1850, I think it was. Edgar Allan Poe. Some of you might have read it before. I'm aware that some people read it sometimes in middle school. I used to read it with my students around 10th grade, I think, and I stopped because most people were like, I don't get it. Mm, mm. So I stopped. But obviously, I don't know if I mentioned this last time. I started because it relates so much to what we're doing right now. Okay? So that's what it is. It's like it relates so much. It's like you think, hey, that stuff doesn't apply to us from like so long ago. Kind of like when we looked at the boarding house and those stories. It's like the story, the sisters. You're like, it's written almost 100 years or more than 100 years ago. This doesn't apply. And then you start reading into it, and it kind of has to do with a little bit of childhood molestation and the priest. And I was like, wait a minute, that's like what happened like not so long ago. What? I guess there hasn't been that many changes. And then now, something 1850, and you're like, whoa, this is talking about disease and all these people dying in this very contagious disease. Hey, kind of like what's happening now, right? So that's why we're reading it. I mean, hopefully you guys enjoyed it. And the way it's going to work with the project, it's going to be both a combination of the we're going to be working with reading stories and doing the project. I'm going to be releasing the project slowly. Typically, if we were in school, I'd just give you, hey, here's the project. But this time, I'm just going to release it slowly. And if you guys talk to your friends who were 12th graders last year, I know some of you have friends. I had a major project. It's going to be a little bit like that, except I'm going to cut maybe half of the chapters because the other part is going to be related to coronavirus and just looking at how it affected us. But again, I'll give you guys more information on that. Okay. Other than that, stay safe. Wear a mask. I'm not gonna try to put on a mask. I don't know where I left it, so hey, it is what it is. Anyways, like I said, stay safe and wear a mask if you're not if you're outside. Wear a mask. Okay. I know a lot of people are going out. I see them. Okay. I have been outside in my car. I'm not getting out of my car, but as I'm driving on my car, I see them. They're like walking, some of them without masks. And some people get really close to other people. I'm like, wait, where's the social distancing? We're not still out of the woods, but some people don't listen. So just kind of stay safe out there, okay? Wear a mask if you're outside. And if you're outside, also stay away from people that you don't, like family members or your family members that live with you, but anybody else, stay away. All right, bye.
All right, good morning, everybody. We are going to be continuing with the story, if you guys remember. we left off. I think we talked about. Let me see. We left off. We talked about Prince Prospero on the previous page and how he was kind of the type of person who just kind of let me see if I could fix this a bit. It's a little, all right, it's a little bit better. All right, so we talked about how I talked about social distancing, staying away from people, and maybe I thought they weren't following it, but again, just seems to be like a big place. I think I talked about how it's as big as a school kind of situation, so maybe that's why they were able to still social distance. Talked about that. That's basically what it was, and they wanted to have a party, I guess, afterwards. Then they went into describing the different rooms, and they did describe this kind of scary room near the bottom. This is reddish, and just people didn't like going in there. Why he would have a room like that is kind of interesting. And as I look at this kind of looks like an eye, but it's not an eye. This is supposed to be the tripod, 3 legs, and this is supposed to be like a place that's holding that. The fire. Okay, so it's like a fire cauldron pit or something like that. So it's just holding the fire. So that's all this is, even though it looks like an eye. I realize that. Okay, we'll go ahead and continue. So I'll continue. Okay. It was in this apartment also that there stood against the western wall a gigantic clock of ebony. Its pendulum swung to and fro with a dull, heavy, monotonous clang, and when the minute hand made the circuit of the face on the hour was to be stricken, there came from the brazen lungs of the clock a sound which was clear and loud and deep and exceedingly musical, but of so peculiar a note and emphasis that at each lapse of an hour the musicians of the orchestra were constrained to pause momentarily in their performance to hearken to the sound, and thus the waltzers perforce ceased their revolutions, and there was a brief disconcert of the whole gay company, and while the chimes of the clock yet rang, it was observed that the giddiest grew pale, and the more aged and sedate passed their hands over their brows as if in confused reverie or meditation. So we'll stop right here. What this is talking about is just, I think Edgar Allan Poe usually likes to build kind of like suspense. It's kind of the situation, like even with this part right here, or kind of like a little bit of a scary situation, the scary room right here, and then now this is kind of like there's this clock. You would hear the dull sound, and it had a peculiar note when, like you guys know, some clocks, old school clocks, kind of like churches, sometimes they'll ring the bell during service or something like that. This one does that every hour. Is it? Yeah, every hour. It says every hour, so every lapse of an hour. And it was so interesting and maybe even loud that they had to stop. And the waltzers, the people who were dancing to the musicians, would also stop. So it's kind of, again, that's kind of building that suspense, kind of eeriness of the place and the story. So even though it's supposed to be happy, again, Prince Prospero is the one who has the stuff there, so maybe that's his taste, but that kind of makes people feel a little bit awkward. Okay, so at least that situation with the clock. I continue. But when the echoes had fully ceased, laughter at once pervaded the assembly, and I'll stop right there. So again, it's kind of that situation. This sounds like kind of an awkward kind of like laugh. It's like kind of like blah, 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 and then everybody stops, and then once the clock stops, it's like kind of an awkward laugh. So that's kind of how I would picture it. Okay, so let me continue. The musicians looked at each other and smiled as if their own nervousness and folly, and made whispering vows each to the other that the next chiming of the clock should produce in them no similar emotion. And then after the lapse of 60 minutes, which embraced 3,600 seconds at the time that flies, there came yet another chiming of the clock, and then were the same disconcert and tremulousness and meditation as before. So tremulous, remember, is kind of like a nervousness. So every time the musicians say, okay, that's not going to get me again, I'm not going to get kind of freaked out by that sound, but every single time they always kept getting freaked out by it. Okay. All right. So interesting. Okay. So the next thing is we're going to read the next one. Again, he's not really, we haven't seen a lot of what's going on. I mean, we've learned a little bit about the stuff that's going on, but really not that much. Just kind of an eeriness that's going on. There's that weird room, and then that weird clock kind of freaks everybody out. So we'll continue. But again, to the story, nothing really important, I guess, if you could call it that. We're going to go ahead and continue. But in spite of these things, it was a gay and magnificent revel. The tastes of the Duke were peculiar. He had a fine eye for colors and effects. He disregarded the decor of mere fashion. His plans were bold and fiery, and his conceptions glowed with barbaric luster. There are some who would have thought him mad. His followers felt that he was not. It was necessary to hear and see and touch him to be sure that he was not. So again, this is like just the taste of that guy, okay? The Prince Prospero, okay? So remember, that's the name of the guy who had everybody over, okay? Prince Prospero. So let me continue. He had directed in great part the movable embellishments of the 7 chambers. Upon occasion of this great feat, and it was his own guiding taste which had given character to the masqueraders. So again, this is just telling you, it's his taste. Everything is kind of his thing, okay? So it's like his taste. Be sure they were grotesque. There were much glare and glitter and piquancy and phantasm. Much of what has been since seen in Hernani. There were arabesque figures with unsuited limbs and appointments. There were delirious fancies such as madmen fashions. There were much of the beautiful, much of the wanton, much of the bizarre, something of the terrible, and not a little of that which might have excited disgust. To and fro in the 7 chambers there stalked, in fact, a multitude of dreams, and these the dreams writhed in and about, taking hue from the rooms and causing the wild music of the orchestra to seem as the echo of their steps. So again, it's just basically telling us it's kind of like this guy's taste. All the kind of the rooms, it says, is kind of a little bizarre, but it's just, you know, it's the way that this guy was. He's Prince Prospero. I guess he kind of had a little bit of a personality, I guess, let's call it that. Okay, so again, most people wouldn't have a dark red room. He wanted a dark red room, so part of this is just his personality, but it's still, most normal people, like those musicians, would have been like, oh, that clock is weird, but that's what Prince Prospero wanted. And again, they're guests, so they're not going to disagree with that, okay? So let me continue. And anon there were strikes, the ebony clock which stands in the hall of the velvet, and then for a moment all is still and all is silent, save the voice of the clock. The dreams are still frozen as they stand, but the echoes of the chimes die away. They have endured but an instant, and a light half-subdued laughter floats after them as they depart. And now again the music swells, and the dreams live and writhe to and fro more merrily than ever, taking hue from the many-tinted windows through which stream the rays from the tripods. But to the chamber which lies most westerly of the 7, there are now none of the maskers who venture, for the night is waning away, and there are flows of ruddier light through the blood-colored panes, and the blackness of the sable drapery upholds. And to him whose foot falls upon the sable carpet, there comes from the near clock of the ebony a muffled peal more sullenly emphatic than any which reaches their ears to indulge in the more remote gaieties of the other apartments. And again, this is just describing pretty much what's kind of the situation. Again, this is mostly describing a little bit more of the rooms, and it's just, you know, it's just how the place is. It's just describing a little bit more of that, and how it dies down when that clock, when you hear the chime of the clock. So again, it's just kind of describing that, and again building the I guess what you could say, the eeriness of the place. But these other apartments were densely crowded, and in them beat feverishly the heart of life, and the revel went wearily on, until in length there commenced the sounding of midnight upon the clock, and then the music ceased, as I have told, and the evolution of the vultures were quieted, and there was an uneasy cessation of old things as before. So again, that clock seems to always kind of put a stop to the party. Okay, so they're all, the other apartments, other than that red room. That red room is kind of, weird. Nobody wants to be in there because it's too red and just kind of freaks people out. But all the other rooms seem to be probably full with people. Again, we're looking back at the reason these people went here is because of that disease, the Red Death. They're not taking any precautions. I could compare it to what's going on. Sometimes when I drive around and I see people like walking around like there's no coronavirus, I could almost see it like that. Okay, no mask kind of situation. So they're in there. I'm sure they're crowding. It says, let me see. I thought I saw crowding. Yeah, they were crowded. So a crowded, they usually is not one or two people. Okay, this is crowded. Okay. So then, and every single time they're like having fun, and then that clock kind of like puts a damper on things. Okay, stops things. Let me continue. But now there were 12 strokes to be sounded by the bell of the clock, and thus it happened, perhaps, that more of thought crept with more of time into the meditations of the thoughtful among those who reveled. And thus, too, it happened, perhaps, that before the last echoes of the last chime had utterly sunk into silence, there were many individuals in the crowd who had found leisure to become aware of the presence of a masked figure which had arrested the attention of no single individual before. So suddenly, there's this kind of interesting figure. There's somebody, a masked figure, like a masked person, figure, shape, which now that it's 12, people have noticed it. Before they hadn't noticed it, but now it's like maybe because the time is getting freakier, everybody's having fun in those rooms, and suddenly they kind of notice this masked figure. And again, everybody's wearing a mask, so why would they notice it? Maybe it just looked a little bit different than everybody else. I don't know. Which had arrested the attention of no single individual before. So before that, nobody had noticed this figure, but suddenly now it becomes more obvious. We'll kind of see why. And the rumor of this new presence having spread itself whisperingly around, there arose at length from the whole company a buzz or murmur expressive of disapprobation and surprise. So people are just kind of like, hey, who's that? Who's that person? What are they doing here? Kind of thing, or so they notice this kind of person or figure walking around, and people are just kind of freaking out. Again, before the 12, nobody notices. Again, this is Allan Poe, the Edgar Allan Poe kind of building, because typically 12, could have happened any other time, but obviously it's 12 because it's a little bit scarier, right? So nobody had noticed this person, but suddenly now it's like, hey, who's that? And then there's the rumors of this new presence, and they call it a presence. Notice that they don't call it a person, so it's almost like it's not a person, and it is. Obviously, it's not like they said it's a monster, but they call it a presence. It's almost like some sort of ghost or something like that. I don't know, but why would the author or Edgar Allan Poe put presence instead? And then I found this word interesting. Because the presence had spread, the rumor had spread. Obviously, rumors spread, but the reason I found that word interesting is also because disease spreads, okay? Kind of like coronavirus, it spreads. So I just found the use of this word very interesting, that he decided to use that word, and I'm sure he did that on purpose. The rumor spread, but obviously it spread like just kind of like disease, okay? So whisperingly around, so people are like, hey, who's that? And they're whispering it around. Then I rose at length from the whole company a buzz. So this is like a whisper. It's like, hey, who's that? And then there's a buzz that people are more talking about it, the murmur, and then expressive disapprobation. If the disapprobation is basically disapproving, okay, they're like, this is just, they're like, hey, who's that? And it's like they're disapproving, and then obviously surprised. And then the last part, then finally terror, of horror, and of disgust. Okay, so that's where this ends. Okay, and I kind of find it interesting. I'm kind of wondering, hey, what's going on? Okay, we'll stop it there for today because I think this is a good spot to stop, just because it ends with this. So again, remember, first they're a little having fun, weird rooms. That guy has kind of a weird taste. and the clock kind of freaks them out. And right at midnight, they suddenly notice this one figure, and then they're all like, "Hey, this is wrong. Who's that?" You know. And then suddenly it goes to terror, horror, and disgust. So terror, horror, kind of the same thing, but then they're disgusted by that. Okay. So again, we'll stop it right there. I think it's a good place to stop, and again, we'll continue with this next week, I guess. But it's a good story so far. I like it. We'll see what happens again. All right, so talk to you guys later.